achieve what is intended. Ownership rights to natural resources constitute a major governance challenge in Africa. And natural resources, as we all know, are a major contributor to public domestic revenue in Africa. And they should not be the sole responsibility or domain of government influence. Private sector and all stakeholders should have the opportunity to be part of how natural resources are managed. And for this to happen, Africa needs resource-based development planning. The resource-rich African countries, about 22 countries in Africa, we classify as resource-rich countries. These countries need resource-based development planning frameworks that bring together all stakeholders in order for natural resources to be effectively managed. So this edition of the report looks at the question of how African countries can improve natural resource revenue management to finance development and achieve structural transformation. The report uses a combination of primary and secondary data, and we have 8 country case studies covered in the report. The countries are Botswana, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Madagascar, Nigeria, Uganda, and Tanzania. So we use these country case studies to highlight good examples as well as challenges of natural resource management in Africa. The report has 5 chapters. Chapter 1, analytical framework and development outcomes. Chapter 2 on institutional and regulatory frameworks for natural resource management in Africa. Chapter 3 looks at resource-based development planning and its importance in strengthening natural resource revenue management. Chapter 4 looks at mobilizing domestic revenue in Africa, and Chapter 5 looks at natural resource growth experiences in the 8 African countries, and the last chapter provides a policy framework on how natural resource revenue can be managed to achieve development objectives. The report addresses 4 broad issues. The first issue relates to the inability of resource-rich African countries to transform their economies. And the second is the challenge of establishing institutions for providing the development impact of natural resources. Third issue is around the interface between development planning and African policy outcomes. And finally, we look at the challenge of raising domestic revenue in Africa. As I said, Africa is transforming, but very slowly, very slowly. And we need to speed up the speed of transformation for us to achieve the development goals. Now, the main findings of the report are as follows. In terms of institutional and regulatory frameworks, there is clear weaknesses in the governance of natural resources, in terms of strength of institutions, in terms of what the institutions are doing to promote transparency, accountability, and to curb rent seeking, which is a real issue across many African countries, and in terms of ensuring revenue predictability. We have a report, another report with more recent data, which shows that in 2008, public revenue in Africa amounted to 31% of GDP. Now it stands at about 19%. And the difference is because revenue relied heavily on natural resource exports. And with the fall in the commodity prices, public revenue in Africa declined and fluctuated. So predictability is a real issue. So there is a need to improve institutions and regulatory frameworks for development impact of natural resources. And these improvements include regulatory and licensing institutions, revenue collection and management systems, and legislative and judiciary systems that enforce legislations. The report looks at the multiple initiatives and frameworks for natural resource revenue governance, including the Natural Resource Commission, the EITI, the African Mineral Vision, and Dodd-Frank Act, and so on. Then the report provides a framework for effective management, more effective management of natural resource revenue for development. And this framework is based on development planning. Development planning is a necessity for African countries. The starting point is to have a comprehensive long-term vision and development plan. Within that long-term development vision and plan, then you can plan how to use your natural resources to channel your natural resource revenue to enhance domestic revenue and to allocate and manage this revenue to finance the investment needed to achieve your development goals. This is a framework that African countries really need. Without a development plan, no country on earth has developed without a comprehensive development plan. So without a comprehensive development plan, there is very little room for us to change what is going on in Africa today in terms of natural resource management. So the report looks at the question of how natural resource revenues contribute to domestic revenue mobilization and how natural resource revenue is collected and the challenges African countries face in terms of revenue collection and management in Africa. I'm not going to go through all that. The findings in Chapter 5 shows that Africa has been growing, as you know, but there is very low, still very huge financing gap in Africa. Therefore, managing natural resource revenue is a priority for African countries that are rich in natural resources if they want to limit the resource gap. Let me go straight to the recommendations of the book. Strengthening institutional and regulatory frameworks is a priority, a policy priority. 1, enhancing transparency and accountability in economic governance. 2nd priority for African countries. Prioritizing and bolstering resource-based development planning is also a must. Accelerating diversification and expanding the links for structural transformation, and strengthening domestic revenue mobilization and resource sharing mechanisms are the policy imperatives for African countries to enhance the contribution of natural resources to their long-term development priorities and achievement of sustainable development on the continent. I hope you will have time to read the report, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. El Haika. the director of the division of ECA that produced this excellent report. Let's quickly switch over to Professor Alan Hatch for his reflections on it. Then we harvest ideas from the floor quickly, and then we wrap it up. Prof, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm sure you're all very tired and hungry and sort of up to here, so I'm not going to be very long. This isn't going to be as long as it sounds from the beginning. So for the past 6 years, I've been teaching at a school, the Nelson Mandela School, which was established to train emerging leaders in Africa's public sphere. Before that, I worked as a senior official in government for about 18 years. In both roles, I've always looked forward to the publication of state-of-the-art publications by international organizations. I guess the earliest ones that I remember of that kind would be the World Development Reports that were always, presented information in a way that was very valuable. They were World Development Reports, OECD reports, UNCTAD reports, and then there were a number of reports which were the cooperative projects between African and non-African institutions. Why did I look forward to them? Well, their role was to sum up the best recent and classic thinking on important contemporary policy topics, to collect, assemble, present data that help us understand the issues and engage with them more effectively. These reports are hugely valuable for policymakers and for those who teach policymakers and emerging policymakers. If you were to look at my reading list for the course that I teach in African economic development issues, a really significant proportion of the material that I use and that I present, that I recommend to students, actually comes from reports like this rather than from academic articles, because I'm teaching practitioners to a large extent, and it's extremely valuable. So in recent years, African institutions such as the ECA have begun writing the reports without our big brothers and sisters in the global north looking over our shoulders, helping us and guiding us. We are now striving to produce state-of-the-art reports from an African perspective, such as the one we have before us, and I have to congratulate the ECA for a very exciting and important report. I read this new report with great enthusiasm. Governance of our natural resources is one of the most critical issues facing Africans, both from economic and environmental perspectives. And it is a matter of great urgency that Africans derive maximum benefit from the exploitation and the management of our natural resources. Africa, as I don't have to tell the people in this room, is fabulously rich in natural resources. If we manage those resources well, they will make us rich. If we manage them poorly, they will make us poor, except for a few individuals who become extremely rich. And it could even do more damage to our continental and global environment. This is how important the issue is and why the report is so welcome. At our school, we're beginning to plan a master's degree in natural resource management, and this report will be incredibly valuable as we move forward to do this. It's a terrific survey of a wide range of important issues with some great new presentations of data and a useful list of bibliographic references. In some of the chapters, I learned a great deal. For example, the chapter on institutional and regulatory frameworks, chapter 2, I thought was had extremely incisive and concise descriptions of a range of institutions and arrangements, natural resource initiatives in governance, which to me were extremely well described and quite analytically critiqued as well. Some of the chapters were a little bit less new to me because of my own background, but did contain up-to-date data. For example, the chapter on domestic resource mobilization or domestic revenue mobilization. The slide that you presented, I think it was slide 8, which has the picture of African resource mobilization between 2005 and 2015, to me, is one of those graphs which tell a story which you couldn't tell in 1,000 words. It's a really powerful learning tool and teaching tool, showing what the impact of natural resources has been on our ability to finance governance. I did feel that the chapter could have been a bit more detailed on equitable strategies for taxation that can work in an African environment. How do you engage in equitable taxation in an African environment? We know how dependent we are on certain sources of taxation and how other areas of taxation are perhaps under-taxed with some unfortunate outcomes. I also thought that there could have been a bit of a discussion about behavioral issues around taxation. And there were one or two minor areas in that chapter where I felt the chapter was a bit let down by a reliance on some secondary sources that weren't comprehensive. And if I can discuss that with the writers, but you know, like all the other chapters, it is extremely valuable, and I'm certainly going to use it to teach with. But I do want to raise one other minor disappointment, and that is that the political economy issues that were raised particularly in Chapter 1 and in Section 1.2.4 on the exploitation of natural resource rents by powerful interests, that's very well described. But further on in the report, where practical strategies are proposed, the rent-seeking issues are often not explicitly taken into account. So we get a picture of what the problems are, what the difficulties are which we face as Africans in environments where there are powerful interests that are difficult to combat. But then we get told what we should do, but not always as much as I would like to see how much we should do. So I think in some of these new state-of-the-art reports, for example, in the World Development Reports over the last 2 or 3 years, and perhaps a couple further back, these political economy issues are more taken into account. Now, it's understandable that in these kinds of reports we want to avoid talking about issues that would be sensitive for member countries. And I don't think we have to do that. I think that we could discuss some of these sensitive issues in a more general way without referring to particular countries. But these are minor concerns. The report is well written, well edited, and well produced. It's timely and pretty well researched. It will be invaluable for my students and for senior policymakers all over Africa, for my colleagues, for students everywhere. And in the planning of our master's course on natural resource management, as it goes forward, I'll keep a well-thumbed copy of the report and already heavily annotated copy of the report with me close at hand at all times. So I'd like to congratulate the ECA for another excellent contribution to African policy making and education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is very inspiring that the book or the report will have long-lasting impact on capacity building, not only for the next generation, but even for those who are managing the economy at the current time. And the combination of secondary data across all countries and detailed, country case studies to draw lessons is a very, good strategy, good methodology that has been, because it's like mixed method. Ordinarily, you just use secondary data and do projections and start talking, but at least you're able to back that up with country, experiences to further enrich. And I like the perspective of Professor Alan, Hash, accepting the sensitivity of finger pointing, which can arise from some, if you like, more critical, views on some of these issues. But the approach, like he said, is to then do it on a generalized basis, not finger pointing, because we need to be able to talk to ourselves very frankly on the continent, particularly since the desire is to use it for teaching and capacity building purposes. Maybe one thing you could therefore do is you begin to ask questions. When you, after teaching, after your class, you can then say, okay, the question is, what are the political economy issues in this? And let them be drawing it on their own. Again, thank you very much. The time is fast spent, so no time for very extensive discussion and comments, but we should at least harvest ideas from the floor. And let me begin from my right. One. Okay, one for now. Okay, one. Please, Robin, Mike. Okay, okay, very good.
Thank you very much. I really, it's very easy about this report because as a professor discussed, the discussion professor said, governance is our big problem. And he said one thing that I want us to very deep our reflection about that. It is that he said that if we better master our natural resources, we will be rich and not individuals. But what the solutions to master the management of our natural resources? It is a question.
Thank you very much.
Other thing I would like to know, I don't know the tendency of the statistics that we have been given to describe the state of governance. I don't know the tendency, just the constatations. But it will be good for us to see if efforts of governments to improve governance, what is the tendency of all the indicators of governance, in order to see if efforts works and effort doesn't work, and why. We talk about governance for years and years, and why it doesn't improve enough. Okay. And also, finally, the graph on revenue.
Yes.
I don't know if it is in the evolution is very good to look if it is in absolute terms or in percentage of GDP, in order to know really what is the tendency of revenue collection effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And there is a second hand somewhere here. Okay, I have only one, two, and that's it. I'm sorry, we cannot take more than two because we have to close. Another program is already starting. So please. Please make it very short and sharp.
Very short, very short. Thank you very much for this very interesting report. I just wanted to raise a concern, particularly around the messaging, and that has to do with the inability of many countries in capturing revenue from natural resource extraction. And in this regard, what the report will have highlighted probably is what other improvements have been made, for example, in the context of the new partnership with the OECD, UNDP, and the tax inspector without borders to enable countries actually capture revenues from natural resource extraction. Okay. The other aspect is the citizens' engagement aspect in natural resource management in the context of free, prior, and informed consent provisions, and the engagement of citizens in multi-stakeholder platform to resolve conflicts arising out of issues of beneficiary in natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, last one.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
I'm
please.
from ECA, but mine is a kind of a call to all of us. We have been hearing one thing. We need our institution to actually provide us with the tool and the right mix of policies so that you can contribute to change. That's exactly what ECA has been doing. And you have actually acknowledged this product as a good one, and that's what we have reported. So what needs to be done from our member states and our partners is actually to use the result of this very good product to actually make change in the policy and in action. So that's what we'll be doing with them. So please use the product, use it for the policy formulation. More important, use it for change. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for the advocacy. All right. Very good. Okay. Prof, you want to respond briefly to the question raised by the
I'll try a couple. I mean, the how to master natural resources. I think the book has a lot of very good proposals about how to do it. I think they also will provoke a discussion. I don't think the book has been distributed before this meeting. So when you get access to it, I think you'll learn a great deal about it. And on trends in governance, well, the latest trends I've seen were the recent Mo Ibrahim Index data, and what it shows is an improvement in governance, a steady improvement in governance, but an incredibly slow, steady improvement in governance. It's still at a very low level. So we're heading in the right direction, but not quickly enough. It would be better to move more quickly in that respect. Okay. I do want to respond to the point about the OECD and UN and other initiatives around taxation cooperation. It's extremely hard for developing countries to tax multinational companies effectively if there isn't a sufficiently transparent exchange of taxation information between all the countries in which that multinational company operates. Mm-hmm. At the moment, African countries are being forced to try to work out what exactly is being mined, how much it's worth, how much value has been added, how much has been exported, and what the legitimate costs of those companies are in the absence of full information about those companies globally. So there was a time when it looked as if the movement towards effective global agreement on base erosion and profit sharing was actually going to happen. It seems to have slowed down recently, and it is something we should really fight for as Africans.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Adam.
Thanks, Professor Olo, and thanks to the audience for the questions and the comments. I would like to start with the question on the domestic revenue figure. The graph actually shows the revenue gap. What is the potential for countries to mobilize and what they are actually mobilizing? So the gap is very huge. It ranges from 0% to 100%. And we have most countries mobilizing about less than 50% of potential revenue. So the gap is huge. That means there is a lot for African countries really to mobilize. There is a huge room for them to mobilize additional resources from different sources, tax, non-tax, revenue, and so on. This is an area that we are working on really to help countries on how to do it, to reduce the tax gap or the revenue gap and mobilize more resources. Very quickly, on the state of governance, inside the report we have indicated the sources of governance statistics. The main of these are Mo Ibrahim governance indicators, and of course the Transparency International also, and others. So on the issue of governance and revenue collection and what African countries can do together with other regions, especially OECD countries, the issues of tax cooperation and exchange of information and so on are issues that are highlighted here, but also highlighted previously in a number of other studies. When it comes to natural resource revenue management, African countries face huge issues, domestic and international. And we have different reports that addressed the domestic as well as the international issues. This report focuses on issues of governance. The previous one was on corruption, measurement, and the international dimension of corruption. It exactly looks at the issue of illicit financial flows out of Africa and how they fuel corruption and resource leakage. So I would like to just refer you to that report and to the original report on illicit financial flows by the Thabo Mbeki panel, high-level panel, that was produced by ECA and AU and presented to African Head of States in 2015. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, the time is not our friend at this point, so let me follow the tradition and request that the three of us stand up and actually launch this very, very important report. Okay, and also let me also inform that soft copies of this, report, they are available on the UNECA website at www.uneca.org/publications. Then you can search for this particular one. Thank you very much.
Sandra.